Okay, hello everyone. So I'm here to talk about Bonfire, a federated framework and app toolkit for creating federated apps. For those of you who are not familiar with the Fediverse or Mastodon, so I figure many more of you might have heard about it in the last few weeks, because there has been a big drive of users trying to leave Twitter. So we've been working on this project for a while, and I'll start by explaining with all of our backronyms, PETALS. Well, it's pretty simple. Postgres for the database. Of course, we're on Erlang. We use Tailwind CSS for styling. And we use Daisy UI, which is a framework on top of that. Alpine.js, and LiveView and Phoenix, of course. And we use Surface, which is maybe less common, but we've had a really good experience with it so far. So this is going to be just a brief overview and intro, and then I'm happy to answer questions as well. So I mentioned Daisy. Two reasons we use it. It makes it much quicker to get started prototyping UI because you have prepared components like buttons and modals and dropdowns that are ready to use, but also it makes theming really easy. So instead of hard coding colors into your templates and views and components, instead you use things like primary color, secondary color, and then it allows for theming. So Bonfire is an extensible toolkit for federated apps. In our case, it means we use the ActivityPub protocol for federation. And what do we mean by extensible? I think this is worth looking into. The simple answer is that if most of you use a mix to manage your projects, you probably use libraries, mostly from Hex, in your project, right? And those libraries can have dependencies of their own, and it creates a graph of dependencies. But in most cases, libraries are used for lower level things, right? Like building blocks that you're then gonna use to create your application logic or your UI. For Bonfire, we use the same principles, but for the whole app. So for data schemas, for functionality, for UI, everything is in a package in a library, so to speak. We'll call them extensions just to differentiate. So this makes the app extensible, meaning that users can add functionality by adding more extensions or can disable extensions, but also makes it more customizable because you can easily fork one little part of the app and modify it, right? And instead of having to maintain a fork of the whole big app. If you don't know ActivityPub, it's a very simple protocol based on inboxes. So it uses follows or mentions to know who to push things to. So it's a push protocol, but otherwise it's very similar to RSS. So it allows updates to flow, but with push rather than pull. And it uses a JSON vocabulary with actors, verbs, and objects for the actual data. So these are some of the apps we have so far and that we're working on. And I'll go through this very quickly. These are extensions that do different things, provide different features. For example, geolocate provides a map UIs. There's one for user profiles, units and measures. And so all of these are building blocks that can depend on each other to do various things. Same with UI, they're in separate extensions. to make them further customizable. And you can do cool things. For example, we have a what you see is what you get editor for writing posts. And the integration with CK editor, as one example, is in an extension. And so that way you can have several different alternative editors, right? And as a user, you can choose the one that you prefer rather than those choices being made by the developer. But yeah, and another cool feature that I wanted to touch on is boundaries. So that's an extension as well. And this brings something that Google Plus had back in the day, which is circles. So you can organize your contacts in circles rather than just having a sort of one-size-fits-all list of friends or followers. And then we went further than that so that you can set permissions per circle. So you can say, who can view a post or who can reply, who can even edit. So it's a very flexible way to manage permissions. I think this is really important for social networking. So beyond Bonfire, as part of our work, we've created a few libraries, and these are not Bonfire specific. They're not extensions. I would just call them libraries. Some of them are on Hex. So I thought I would give a brief intro of these libraries because you might find some of them useful, and it might be a nice entry point for you to look at our code. And then, if you further want to use or contribute to Bonfire, that would be great. But if you just want to start with these libraries as well, that's great. So one is called Ectoparkles. And as you can imagine, for a social network, we have a very rich relational database with a lot of associations. So a pet peeve of mine is how verbose it is in Ecto when you want to join an association and preload it properly. By properly, I mean that it is loaded as a join in your query and not as a separate query. And so this library provides the JoinPreload macro, which is just a one line to join and preload associations, including nested associations. Flexto is another one, which is especially useful for us. I don't know if other people will have use cases for it, but allows you to extend Ecto schemas in your config. So this is useful when you have extensible apps because you might want to create associations between different extensions that don't depend on each other by default, and you only want those associations to exist if both extensions are installed. So doing it in config allows that flexibility. Another one is arrows. So these are helpers to sort of make pipes more powerful. So one of them is pretty common. There are several libraries already doing this kind of OK piping. So it only continues if the previous entry in the pipe returned OK or an OK tuple. But this other one I haven't seen elsewhere, which is with the 3 dots, being able to specify where you want to pass the result of the previous expression in the pipe. So by default in Elixir, it's usually always the first parameter of the function that receives that. But here you can say, I want it to be the 3rd parameter of the function that receives the post. Here are 3 more libraries. One is untangle, So this basically allows you to inspect or log things in your code. It's similar to DBG, which came out in the latest Elixir, but it does things slightly differently in that DBG does breaking. So that's not necessarily what you always want to do. You might want to just inspect or log something. And it sends everything to logger, which is handy. We run xunit with capture log true, which means that when you're running tests, you'll only see in your log output failed tests, and any successful tests will have no output at all. Another one is Absent Client, which if some of you use Absent for GraphQL, this library allows you to do queries to your API from the same app that serves that API and bypasses HTTP and JSON, so directly gets the data from Absent. So it's quite efficient. And Iconify X, it's actually a wrapper around a JavaScript library, but which creates Phoenix components for any icon you might want to use in your app. So it only downloads all of those icons in dev mode, and then when you use it the first time, it will create a Phoenix component and inject that into your app. So this is where you can find us, follow us, or join our chat. And I'm happy to answer more questions.
Thank you, Mayel. Awesome prezzo. That looks really interesting. And some of those extensions look pretty wild. Has anyone got any questions? Let's see if there's any in the chat.
Yeah, I've got a question, if you don't mind. I remember Google Plus circles, and one of the problems is that you couldn't publish them to get other people to subscribe to them. Can you do that with Bonfire?
Not yet. They're private by default, because I think that's the initial use case is like you create, your close friends group, your family group, and you want to share things that way. But yeah, that's something we've discussed a lot, having optional public, or not necessarily public, but again, you could use circles and boundaries to say who can see your circles or a specific circle, and then be able to use it or subscribe to it as well.
Yeah, cool. Thanks.
I had a question around the utility libraries. Did you write all of those yourself?
The ones that I mentioned here, yes.
Yeah, I was intrigued.
Some with other contributors as well. So it's not all me personally, but yeah, our team.
So my follow-up question was, the arrows library looks really pretty cool, and the ... syntax was particularly interesting. How did you do that?
It's macros.
How do you target the 3 dots?
So that part wasn't me. I'm looking at the code right now. I'll share a link directly to the code.
Everyone on Zoom, I'll share my screen if that's all right. Is everyone done with this slide?
Can I just ask one more question?
Yeah, go for it.
You mentioned that you you're using quite a big database model, basically. And being the social network, I'm just wondering, have you ever thought of anything else, like you're using Postgres? Did you look at graph databases like Neo4j or something like that to use?
Yes. So the history of our project is that we forked off of an internal project from Moodle, which is an Australian company. But anyway, as part of that, yeah, I took a lot of time to research at the time a handful of serious options for the database. And it really was always a difficult list of pros and cons, and then also, you know, the viability of a technology, and then always going back to Postgres. And when you get into the more uncommon features of Postgres, you know, there's a lot it can give you. For example, we use JSON-B as a data type, not for everything, but for the ActivityPub library that needs to ingest JSON from other servers and other implementations. So, you know, we don't know what schema that comes into necessarily. So we store that in the database in JSON-B, and that works great.
I have another question. I haven't got on to Mastodon yet, but is the Fediverse related to Mastodon? Do they all talk to each other?
That's right.
Okay, cool. All right, and another question from the audience.
Are you able to give a quick demo of one of the applications built with it? Like, just show us what it looks like and maybe one interesting one that you like?
Yeah,
I'll have to
sure thing.
stop sharing. Josh.
Oh yeah, you'll need to reshare your screen because I took over.
Can you see that?
Yep. You might want to make any text or anything a little bit bigger. Anyone read that?
How's that?
Yeah.
I cannot see what I'm sharing, so I don't know if it's the right.
Oh, you're sharing GitHub and the arrows.
Oh, no, that's not it. So this is the what we call the playground instance of Bonfire. So you can go and sign up to that to play around with it. Right here, I'm in the topics app, which is kind of like a forum, I guess. You can define different topics that you post in, and people can follow topics. So this is something that Mastodon doesn't have, for example, because Mastodon is modeled on Twitter, where everything is a person and you follow people. And I think that's part of the toxicity of it. Anyway, being able to follow topics is cool. It's one of them. I can just browse the app a bit. So this is the main screen with your feed. And here you can see the feed mixes, posts, and discussions, but also this is a task coming from the coordination app. And I can here set it as completed directly from the feed, or boost things or reply. There. It's the coordination app. So as you can see, there's a lot to do because we're using this to coordinate Bonfire development as well. Oh, and some people are testing it more for fun as well. Go for a hike. Yeah.
That looks pretty cool. How ready is it for being a sort of a Mastodon client or Fediverse client?
So currently I'm focused on federation testing, which is a particular challenge because you're dealing with other implementations. And there's many of them, of course, Mastodon being the main one. But you know, you cannot really write unit tests to be like, you know, to test all of those things that third-party software correctly receives and parses everything you send them, and vice versa. So, but we're aiming for the end of the year for that. To have something really where people can feel confident using it as their main social network.
Awesome. Any other questions from the crowd?
Just a minor comment about arrows. There was a library release late last year, early this year, called Needlework. Contains a bunch of sort of interesting operators for piping through. If anyone's sort of interested in Needlework. If anyone's interested in making their code more forth-like, then that seems to be an approach.
Anyone else? All right. Thanks for the talk, Mayel. That looks super interesting. Good luck making that ready by the end of the year.
Thank you.
I'm going to have to go try it out.